conversation with.
Welcome to our interview session with Margrethe Vestager. Margrethe Vestager is a Danish politician and European Commissioner. She is currently serving as Executive Vice President of the European Commission for a Europe Fit for the Digital Age. And she recently got the title Big Tech's Fiercest Opponent by Deutsche Welle. Frau Vestager, welcome to Republica. And have you already printed some t-shirts and stickers with that claim?
Well, thank you very much for this welcome. I know I have been busy preparing for this talk with you.
Okay, well, maybe we'll print some up. I think that should be known to the world. And you earned this title by kicking off a debate about regulating the use of artificial intelligence in the European Union with a proposal that you recently released. And we'd like to talk to you today about that proposal, as well as some related topics around digital infrastructure and digital civil society in Europe. So thanks again for being with us today. So, in 2020, the US decided to ban AI and facial recognition technology for police use, policy use. And you are now taking a step further, in a way, with the human rights-based approach regarding AI that you've put forward with your proposal. But you did not include the banning of facial recognition technologies. And I would be really curious to understand why, and what you would say to those people that fear that this is going to open the door to more state surveillance using these technologies, and the concerns that that's released.
Well, the first thing I think to note is that what I want to achieve, what we want to achieve, is that we can use digital technologies in full to create better societies, more inclusive societies, where maybe at long last, sort of all these promises that has been given over decades and decades, all these promises of world-class health systems, of ease of transportation, of access to education for everyone, that they can be fulfilled. But if we are to use technology in that respect, obviously we need to trust it. And I think there is a sense of urgency to make sure that we actually use technology for human purposes, instead of accepting that technology just slides into making some of us part of sort of the input or part of the product, and others the ones that benefits from technology. And this is why we're really pushing forward to put the necessary laws in place. And when one look at technology that builds on biometrics, facial recognition is just one of them. Can also be technology that recognizes you by the way you walk, or your gesture, or the way you talk. Some of that can be extremely useful, depending, of course, that your privacy is being respected and privacy rules are being upheld. Then biometric identification can be really useful. When you pass a border, if you want to open your gadget. The real question comes when it is used for remote identification. And here we'd say, in principle, that is forbidden, because Europe is not a continent of mass surveillance. It has been tried before, old school, before it became digital, and we really don't want it back. So in principle, it's not allowed, if our suggestion is being followed up, to do mass surveillance with remote identification. Mm-hmm. There are some exceptions, though, because it can be that police would need it for the search of a missing child, a terrorist suspect, or someone suspect of really serious crimes that we all agree on, sort of for the European arrest order, the serious part of that. And then after a court order, the police would be able to use that kind of technology. But I think that the point here, the point that is really important, is to say, no, we do not want mass surveillance in our societies that can identify who you are in real time.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about social scoring. So your proposal does ask for a ban of social scoring. What would that entail? And if we hear social scoring, we immediately think of China, of course. So what definition of social scoring are you working with?
Well, there would be use cases where it could be completely legitimate. For instance, in my home country, Denmark, there is an insurance company who says if you drive with this app on your phone, then we can actually assess your driving. And if you're a good, cautious driver, your insurance will be cheaper than if you're reckless. So there is a one-to-one sort of connection between that you can accept for the insurance company to follow the way you drive, and for the product they will offer them. But what we say is that sort of the idea of social scoring, as we know it from the Chinese society, that authorities can follow what you do, and because of that, give you points that will then give you access to, for instance, certain services or access to travel in your society. That's a use case where we'd say, no, this has no place in our union because it is so intrusive. This is not the role of the state to follow you around in that respect, whether you are, running a red light or late with paying your rent. And on the basis of that, they're saying, maybe your child will have to wait a bit longer before being accepted to kindergarten.
I think it's great that you're taking such a differentiated approach and really looking at the effects of the respective technologies in society. And therefore, one aspect that you didn't include in your proposal kind of surprised me, and that concerns the monetization of health data. In Article 3 of the right to integrity, as part of the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, it's explained that you cannot sell parts of your body for economic purposes. And that makes a lot of sense, of course. So I'm wondering, why are we not seeing health data as an extension of that and regulating it in a similar way and allowing capitalization instead?
Well, as we speak, my colleagues responsible for health, they are working on how to create a safe health data space. At least in some parts of the union, people are more than willing to say, if it's safe, if my privacy is protected, I would be more than happy for my data to go into research for a new cure, for a new vaccine, for a new diagnosis to be set up. And of course, sometimes it can be difficult to say, well, if there is an important innovation by a university, should that not be monetized? Well, I think that is legitimate to do that. The question is how you do it. So what we are trying to do is to balance things here, to make sure that we can get the benefit from the use of data, and that those benefits, they of course come back to you in terms of better services or better products that you would otherwise not have had the access to.
We'd love to discuss that further, but will hopefully be another discussion with your colleagues working on that currently.
Yeah, I want to segue a little bit into the role of civil society organizations, also the representation of civil society organizations, especially when it comes to policy making, because compared to industry and also compared to business consultancies, European civil society organizations struggle to have a strong impact on the policy debate. And I mean, if we look at the European Commission's high-level expert group on AI, I think you had 52 experts, and yeah, civil society was underrepresented within this group. So I'm wondering if we're talking about the societal effects and values and the public interest that we want AI to be driven by, aren't those stakeholders, those actors, essential for the debate? And if so, what is the European Commission doing to ensure that these stakeholders are well represented?
One of the reasons why we were very careful with this proposal and why it took quite some time was that we came from the high-level expert group, and these experts did come from different sides of society, and their recommendation into a white paper. And that white paper actually a lot of people discussed it and gave us feedback. We got more than 1,200 different contributions, and they were from all sides of society. They were from industry, they were from business, they were from unions, they were from NGOs, they were from academia, they were from consumer organizations. And I think one should not underestimate having a voice. It is not necessarily so that because you have 10 business organizations saying more or less the same, then you completely drown if you're just one or two NGO that comes with a different point of view. Because part of the Commission responsibility is, of course, to balance things. And here also in our work with this proposal, it has been really important also always to keep in mind that we have a treaty. We have the Charter of Fundamental Values, and our approach to technology should reflect that, because this is groundbreaking. This is not just another regulation. This is about how to deal with technology that may pose risk to our fundamental values. That is the very point of this piece of legislation.
Yeah, I mean, what we see often is that there's a proposal, then people can comment on it, civil society organizations as well as industry, but the resources are like, there's much fewer resources on the side of civil society organizations when it comes to advocacy work and on really taking the time to read through these huge pieces of paper. So I'm wondering, since it's so hard for these organizations to access core funding, is this also something you see as a role of the European Commission to support civil society organizations, maybe also with funding, in order so that they could do their advocacy work better?
I don't know. I've never thought about the funding question. For me, the most important thing is to have ears for everyone. So to listen really carefully, because it may be, of course, when you say so, you have a point that NGOs are not necessarily well funded, but very driven. And I myself find that I get, a qualified, thoughtful, very often also creative and constructive response, also dealing with non-industrial partners. And for me, that makes quite a big difference, because of course, industry is important, but industry is a part of our society. It's not all of society.
Yeah, we might get back to the funding question a little bit later. I think it's obviously the European Union provides a lot of great opportunities, from Horizon program to the new AI fund, where you are supporting different civil society stakeholders to get a louder voice and a seat at the table. But yes, sometimes it feels like some people have to fight very hard for their seat at the table and others are given it too quickly. So I want to segue also a little bit away from AI and into some more infrastructural and platform topics, especially as it said that building our own digital infrastructures from the actual cloud infrastructure to the platform level is seen as a key issue for Europe's digital sovereignty. So very recently, 2012, IT companies and institutions have been allowed into the Gaia X Club, you could say, or allowed in as part of the Gaia X Alliance. This happened at the end of March, and that included companies from the US and China, such as Huawei, Alibaba, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and even Palantir. Of course, this caused outcry amongst many people who had put high hopes in this technology as part of like a new path of Europe, sort of leading the way in a more democratic, more democratic way perhaps than the US and China have done in the past. Do you think by letting these kind of companies become a part of the alliance that we have forfeited this opportunity for more sovereignty?
No, I don't think so. It really depends on whether or not sort of Gaia X stays loyal to its mission. Because the point is to take care. It's not a commission thing. It's it's a French-German initiative, but the mission is European. It is taking care of European interests within the framework of a European rulebook and promoting European standard setting. And I think it's a point in question to say, well, you can participate, but this is our agenda. There's nothing hidden here. If you want to be part of Gaia X, it's because that you want to help out taking care of European interests. And I think it's really important that that is quite clear, and also that you do that within a European rulebook. It may be if things are more sensitive, that one needs to make sure that there are not security issues. That may well be for the future. I will not exclude that. But I think the important point is to say, well, there is a reason why we do these things, and this is completely legitimate. We have European interests, and we want to see them fulfilled.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a fine line between, let's say, digital protectionism and digital sovereignty sometimes when it comes to how do we open the structures that we create for others to interact and engage with. But I am wondering whether you would also see that we might need to emphasize on creating our own technologies, our own platforms, our own infrastructures more than we have done in the past. I meet a lot of politicians in Germany, but also in Europe generally, that say we have to, like this third path that I just mentioned, we need to start paving it, and we need to start paving it by creating platform economy models that are democratic, that match our social market system, etc. But then very often we seem so overwhelmed with everything that exists in the internet currently, and are not really building these solutions of our own. Is this something that you think we need to do more and that you would like to encourage to happen more, or do you not see that as such a pressing issue?
So it's not that we lack platforms. The point is that we lack traction for these platforms, that people will actually use them. It's not that we lack European innovation. Europeans are, there's an entrepreneurial culture in Europe. There's a lot of innovation. Still, the highest number of patents are being taken here in Europe. There is a really fertile ground for startups. Some of them then migrate out of Europe, which we're trying to do something about to enable that they get European capital actually to grow and to scale here within Europe. And my third point would be that there's really no need to try to redo some of the social media that we see today. It should be next generation. And maybe we should focus on what is a real European stronghold, which is the sort of the industrialization when it comes to digital. Because Europe has a really industrial culture and an industrial history. So next chapter of digitization is indeed that industrial chapter. That is sort of the business to business chapter. That is when everything becomes a data point. When energy goes digital, mobility goes digital, health goes digital, public services go digital. Here you find that we in Europe have a lot to offer, also because we have big public service sectors who are, in demand of developing these different services. We have really important industries. We have really important mobility industries as well. So instead of looking back and being sort of not too content with the first big chapter of digitization, then better look ahead. Because some of the things that we learned from not being successful in the first chapter, that we lacked the digital single market, that we lacked a capital structure that will feed capital into some of these businesses, that we lacked skilled people to work in those businesses, well, that is work in progress. And then focus on the things to come where there is a really strong European capacity to have a fair shot at it.
Yeah, let's stick a little bit with the topic of innovation and how we can foster innovation. In a conversation last year with Shoshana Zuboff, highly recommended conversation for everyone who hasn't watched it, you said that the idea that we can have either regulation or innovation is false, and that regulation is setting the boundaries, and those boundaries will provoke a new kind of innovation. than the innovation that does not care about human dignity, that does not care about integrity and about the basics of democracy. So I'm wondering, in order to become a digital innovative society, what do we need to address besides the regulatory topics? How do we enable and foster innovation?
Well, we do it by inviting maybe also sometimes unlikely parties to come together in our different programs, and we need to demand it. For instance, the uptake of applications designed with privacy as default has been really slow, and I think that has been a disappointment to many, because you still feel that either you have to go through complicated steps, sort of to set the settings of your phone, or you have to read through terms and conditions, or make sure that you get your cookie preference choices right every time. No one has the time for that. They have a life. So you would want to have, technology that would help you do these kind of things. So I think it's also important that we signal we expect technology to enable us to enforce our rights. We expect technology to be able to do more than what it does today. What I mean about inviting maybe some extraordinary parties to come together is, for instance, to do more hackathons, to invite more smaller businesses on board with universities to be part of sort of sandboxing, a more sort of playful approach to these things, because there is an innovative capacity within Europe. And that, of course, needs to be tapped. And we have a lot of funding for it within Horizon Europe, within the Digital Europe program. So in that respect, if we organize ourselves well, then we can have even more than we have today.
Mm-hmm. I think hackathons is an interesting format there, because it's very much focused on innovation, inventing new things, like new approaches. But at the same time, there's successful open source projects, tools that are maybe not the most innovative, brand new things, but things that work and that lack resources for maintenance. So I'm wondering, if we're so much focused on innovation and like always fund the brand new stuff, like what happens to projects that need to be maintained? Like an example of a fund that does this really well is the Open Tech Fund in the US, that is supporting infrastructure for internet freedom, and they do not only focus on innovation but also on maintenance and supporting communities, on supporting non-profits but also for-profits working in the open source space. Do you think Europe needs something like an European Open Tech Fund?
And especially, if I may just add, because Horizon, as you mentioned, is a fantastic program, but it's always project-based, and the idea that you can have a more longer-term support, especially for digital rights work, that I feel is a gap, as Julia just addressed.
Yes, it may be so. I don't know if it is best addressed at a European level or better addressed at a national level. That it's easier to get people on board from a national approach. That I don't know, but I really do see the need. And actually, I don't think that it's only within tech. Also, a lot of research within, for instance, known molecules is not that interesting for pharmaceutical companies, but can be really, really interesting for us as citizens, that old molecules can be useful for other purposes than what they were originally tested for. So I think there is a role here for different types of funding coming together. And maybe just one more point on innovation. Having a European sort of tool set in order to enable also groundbreaking innovation, also in smaller businesses, I find that really important. As for instance, the access to data from the Galileo satellite program that is accessible for smaller businesses, or the system of high performance computers. We just opened the first one, the Vega, and that gives a completely different sort of, well, it's not a playground, but but new opportunities for businesses to get to a capacity that they would otherwise never, ever get close to.
Yeah, I agree. Like also like taking the infrastructure into account that we need in order to build innovation on top of this, and maybe also thinking about a European infrastructure fund, because I think the European level is more interesting than the national level, because many of these software projects are developed from teams that are in different countries that work on the projects across borders, obviously. And if it's only focusing too much on the nation state, then we might not be able to fund these teams that are working agile across countries. But I want to shift gears. Yeah. No, please go ahead.
When you have kind of teams, how do you then also influence sort of the national agenda in different member states? Because very often that is as important, because then you also, I think, sometimes more directly foster the cultural change that is needed.
I think luckily we have a growing and good ecosystem of digital rights NGOs that are operating on the national level, and then ADRI that creates an umbrella organization on the EU level. But I think it's true that they're all struggling to get core funding, no matter whether on the national or on the European level, and having that system that's growing, that ecosystem of NGOs, accompanied also by the appropriate funding structures or consultation opportunities within government, I think could be a fantastic elevator, basically.
Yeah. And when we talk about innovation, it's of course also interesting to see who is innovating. And when we look at the tech companies, the people that are working in ICT, we see that there's a huge gender gap, even though, The Guardian, like a couple of weeks ago, wrote that Silicon Valley's most astute critics are women. We think of Timnit Gebru, Safia Noble, Kate Crawford, Francesca Bria, which is true for the US and also for Europe, if you look at yourself. But still, when we look at the development and the female founders, there's this huge gender gap. Less than 20% of ICT specialists in the EU are women. And in 2019, and I find this number very interesting, $92 of every $100 invested in European tech companies went to founding teams that were all male. So what do you do to address this gender gap?
Well, we have made a strategy to be able to do it, to work with people on ground in member states, to encourage that more women come in, and also to broaden the understanding of what does it take to work within the tech sector, because it is much broader. I think there are some old images of what does it mean to work within the tech sector that we need to retire in order to make it more interesting. When you really started recruiting more women to some of the engineering studies, it was because you got a climate engineer, a bioengineer, an environmental engineer. So you broadened the picture to make it more interesting. And just to add on your diagnosis, I think it is really critical to get more women into this sector, because it's a sector where you, to a very large degree, shape our future society. If the European Parliament had the same composition as the tech sector, I think we would hit the streets and say, come on, we need more diversity here. It cannot be that those who make our legislation, they are so much the same, not only the same gender, but also very much the same generation. We want change here. And it is, I think, of great importance that it is a diverse community who shapes this, because it's not just important to have humans in the loop, it's also important to have diverse humans in the loop in order to make sure that technology is not biased. It's a number of things that should happen, and it has been an endeavor for a couple of years. It is surprisingly difficult to make it happen. So it's really a long stretch.
Yeah.
Well, I'm certainly glad that there's women like you at the forefront of the European Union and creating such policies and proposals as the one that you've recently put out. So to close with, I'd like to know, what's next for the fiercest opponent of big tech? And maybe you want to give a shout out to the Republica community in the sense of what kind of attention, what kind of support would you like to see also from the public regarding the proposal you put forward, or what other kind of engagement opportunities would there be?
Oh, there's a lot to do because, of course, it has taken us a lot of debate and a lot of also inclusive and participatory debate to get here, but it's only starting now. And some of the debates are really tricky because, of course, there is a lot of definitions in such a proposal that will be discussed, that will be hammered out. For instance, we would prohibit the use of subliminal messaging to make you do things that are damaging to you or to others. But how to make sure that we can actually catch it. So for those with sort of a legal technical interest, there's a lot to discuss to help us get it right without it getting more complicated than it is already. The second thing is to work nationally to encourage members of the council to stay aligned that we need a European approach. Because there is always sort of, maybe the member state should do something here and be a bit specific. And I think really, if we want to do something serious, where we are also, setting a course also globally for this debate, then we need to insist that we do something at a European level. And here there's, I think, a lot of persuasion to do so that it's not just watered down to be something where you have basically 27 different ways of doing things. And then it will be really difficult to maintain what is the core, that we want technology that serves humans, and we want to be able to trust the use cases of AI instead of just shrugging shoulders and say, well, we don't know how it works, but it's helpful, so let's just go do it. That is not ambitious. And I think with working together, we can make sure that this is not just an ambitious proposal, but it will also be an ambitious law that can be have a real effect in everyday life in the many, many places where technology will be used.
Absolutely. And I think it's safe to say that many of the people hopefully listening to us and looking at us right now are going to be part of that effort. So thank you so much for being part of Republica this year and for being part of this interview, and wishing you all the best for the next months with that work.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me. It was great to be with you online. Hope to see you soon in person.
Yes, hope to be on stage together next time that we welcome everybody to Republica. Have a lovely day, Margrethe, and thank you so much for your wonderful work.
Thank you very much, and likewise.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.